The Republic. By Plato, Aristotle son of Ariston. Modern English Translation 2023. Introduction. Plato, the nickname given to Aristocles by his coach, means broad shoulders, was born in 427 BCE. In the realm of philosophy, few works have endured the test of time with the enduring wisdom and timeless relevance as Plato's The Republic. Written more than 2 millennia ago, this masterpiece of ancient Greek thought remains a beacon of insight into the nature of justice, the ideal society, and the pursuit of truth. As we embark on this intellectual journey through the pages of The Republic, let us first heed the words of its illustrious author, Plato himself, who once said, "Justice means minding your own business and not meddling with other men's concerns." This admonition, rooted in the heart of Plato's philosophical quest, sets the stage for a profound exploration of the principles that underlie a just society. But The Republic is more than a mere treatise on justice. It is a dialogue that continues to resonate with the echoes of profound questioning and exploration. In the words of Socrates, Plato's revered teacher and the central figure in this dialogue, the unexamined life is not worth living. With this challenge, Socrates invites us to embark on a quest for self-knowledge, societal harmony, and the pursuit of the highest truths. This timeless conversation, guided by the wisdom of the ancients, and allow the words of Plato's The Republic to illuminate our minds and inspire our hearts as we seek to unravel the secrets of justice, the foundations of the ideal state, and the eternal quest for a life worth living. Chapter 1. Old Age, Wealth, and the Quest for Justice. Yesterday, I went down to the Piraeus with my friend Glaucon, the son of Ariston. We went to offer our prayers to the goddess Bendis, the Thracian Artemis, and to witness the celebration of the festival, which was something new. I was amazed by the procession of the local inhabitants, but the Thracians' procession was equally, if not more, beautiful. After we finished our prayers and observed the spectacle, we turned towards the city. At that moment, Polemarch, the son of Cephalus, noticed us from a distance as we were about to leave, and he instructed his servant to run and ask us to wait for him. The servant grabbed my cloak from behind and said, "Polemarch wants you to wait." I turned around and asked where his master was. The servant pointed to Polemarch, who was coming towards us, and said, "There he is, coming after you. Please wait." Glaucon replied, "Certainly, we will wait." In a few minutes, Polemarch arrived, accompanied by Adeimantus, Glaucon's brother, Niceratus, the son of Nicias, and several others who had also attended the procession. Polemarch said to me, "Socrates, I see that you and your companion are on your way to the city." I responded, "You are not far off." He then asked, "Do you see how many of us there are? Are you stronger than all of us? If not, you will have to stay here." I replied, "Is it not possible that we might persuade you to let us go?" Polemarch challenged, "But can you persuade us if we refuse to listen?" Glaucon interjected, "Certainly not." Polemarch concluded, "Then we will not listen, you can be sure of that." Adeimantus added, "Has no one told you about the torch race on horseback in honor of the goddess that will take place in the evening?" I exclaimed, "Horses! That is something new. Will the horsemen carry torches and pass them to one another during the race?" Polemarch confirmed, "Yes, and not only that, but there will also be a festival at night that you should definitely see. Let us rise soon after supper and attend this festival. There will be a gathering of young men, and we can have a good conversation." Glaucon reluctantly agreed, saying, "I suppose, since you insist, we must." I replied, "Very well." So, we went with Polemarch to his house, where we found his brothers Lysias and Euthydemus, along with Thrasymachus the Chalcedonian, Charmantides the Paeonian, and Cleitophon, the son of Aristonomus. Cephalus, Polemarch's father, whom I hadn't seen in a long time, was also there. He appeared much older and was seated on a cushioned chair, wearing a garland on his head, as he had been making sacrifices in the courtyard. There were several other chairs arranged in a semicircle in the room, and we sat down beside him. He greeted me warmly and said, "Socrates, you don't come to see me as often as you should. If I were still able to visit you, I wouldn't ask you to come to me. But at my age, it is difficult for me to go to the city, so you should come to the Piraeus more often. Let me tell you, as the pleasures of the body fade away, the pleasure and charm of conversation become even greater to me. Therefore, do not deny my request. Make our house your gathering place and spend time with these young men. We are old friends, and you will feel at home with us. I replied, Cephalus, there is nothing I enjoy more than conversing with elderly men. I consider them like travelers who have already embarked on a journey that I too may have to take. I believe it is necessary to inquire from them whether the path is smooth and easy or rugged and difficult. And this is a question I would like to ask you, who has reached the stage of life that the poets called a threshold of old age. Is life harder towards the end? What can you tell me about it? Cephalus responded, I will tell you, Socrates, what I feel. Men of my age tend to gather. We are like birds of a feather, as the old proverb says. And at our meetings, the common tale among my acquaintances is that they can no longer enjoy eating or drinking. The pleasures of youth and love have vanished. There was a time when life was good, but that time is gone, and life is no longer what it used to be. Some complain about the mistreatment they receive from their relatives and sadly attribute many evils to their old age. But to me, Socrates, these complainers seem to blame something that is not truly at fault. If old age were the cause, then I, and every other old man, would feel the same way. However, that is not my experience, nor the experience of others I have known. I vividly remember the aged poet Sophocles when asked how love suits with age. Sophocles, are you still the same man you once were? He replied, Peace, most gladly have I escaped the thing you speak of. I feel as if I have escaped from a mad and furious master. His words have often come to mind since then, and they still hold true for me. Indeed, old age brings a great sense of calm and freedom. When passions loosen their grip, as Sophocles says, we are freed not from just one mad master, but from many. The truth is, Socrates, these regrets and complaints about relatives are not due to old age, but rather to people's characters and temperaments. Those who possess a calm and happy nature will hardly feel the burden of age. But for those with an opposite disposition, both youth and age are equally burdensome. I listened in admiration, wanting to engage Cephalus further so that he would continue speaking. Yes, Cephalus, I said, but I suspect that people in general are not convinced by your words. They believe that old age sits lightly upon you not because of your happy disposition, but because you are wealthy. Wealth is known to be a great comforter. Cephalus replied, You are right, they are not convinced, and there is some truth in what they say, although not as much as they think. I could answer them as Themistocles answered the Seriphian who insulted him, saying that he was famous not for his own merits, but because he was an Athenian. Themistocles said, If you had been a native of my country or I of yours, neither of us would have been famous. The same reply can be made to those who are not wealthy and are impatient with old age. For a good poor man, old age cannot be a light burden, and a bad rich man can never have peace with himself. I asked Cephalus, May I ask whether your fortune was mostly inherited or acquired by you? Cephalus replied, Acquired, Socrates. Do you want to know how much I acquired? In the art of making money, I have been halfway between my father and grandfather. My grandfather, whose name I bear, doubled and tripled the value of his inheritance, which was similar to what I possess now. But my father, Lysanias, reduced the property below what it is at present. I will be satisfied if I leave it to my sons not less, but a little more than I received. That is why I asked you the question, I replied, because I see that you are indifferent about money. This characteristic is more often found in those who have inherited their fortunes than in those who have acquired them. The creators of fortunes have a second love of money as a creation of their own, resembling the affection of authors for their own poems or of parents for their children. Besides that, natural love of it for the sake of use and profit which is common to them and all men. Hence, they are very bad company, for they can talk about nothing but the praises of wealth. That is true, Cephalus said. Yes, that is very true. But may I ask another question? What do you consider to be the greatest blessing which you have gained from your wealth? I asked. Cephalus replied, one of which I could not easily convince others. When a man thinks himself to be near death, fears and cares enter his mind which he never had before. The tales of a world below and the punishment which is exacted there for deeds done here were once a laughing matter to him, but now he is tormented with the thought that they may be true. Either from the weakness of age or because he is now drawing nearer to that other place, he has a clearer view of these things. Suspicions and alarms crowd thickly upon him, and he begins to reflect and consider what wrongs he has done to others. And when he finds that the sum of his transgressions is great, he will often start up in his sleep for fear, like a child. He is filled with dark forebodings. But to him who is conscious of no sin, sweet hope, as Pindar charmingly says, is the kind nurse of his age. Hope, he says, cherishes the soul of him who lives in justice and holiness, and is the nurse of his age and the companion of his journey. Hope, which is mightiest to sway the restless soul of man. How admirable are his words! And the great blessing of riches, I do not say to every man, but to a good man, is that he has had no occasion to deceive or defraud others, either intentionally or unintentionally. When he departs to the world below, he is not apprehensive about offerings due to the gods or debts which he owes to men. Now, to this peace of mind, the possession of wealth greatly contributes. Therefore, I say that, weighing one thing against another, of the many advantages which wealth has to give to a man of sense, this is in my opinion the greatest. Well said, Cephalus, I replied. But as for justice, what is it? Is it simply speaking the truth and paying your debts? And even to this, are there not exceptions? Suppose a friend, when in his right mind, has deposited weapons with me, and he asks for them when he is not in his right mind. Ought I to give them back to him? No one would say that I ought or that I would be right in doing so, just as no one would say that I ought always to speak the truth to one who is in that condition. Cephalus agreed, saying, "You are quite right." But then, I said, speaking the truth and paying your debts is not a correct definition of justice. Polemarch interjected, "Quite correct, Socrates, if Simonides is to be believed." Cephalus then said, "I fear that I must go now, for I have to look after the sacrifices. I hand over the argument to Polemarch and the company." I asked, "Is not Polemarch your heir?" Cephalus replied, "To be sure," and went away laughing at the sacrifices. I turned to Polemarch and said, "Tell me then, O heir of the argument, what did Simonides say about justice, according to you?" Polemarch answered, "He said that the repayment of a debt is just, and in saying so, he appears to me to be right. I would be sorry to doubt the word of such a wise and inspired man. But his meaning, though probably clear to you, is the opposite of clear to me. For he certainly does not mean, as we were just now saying, that I ought to return a deposit of weapons or of anything else to one who asks for it when he is not in his right mind, and yet a deposit cannot be denied being a debt. Yes, that is correct. Each skill or ability has its own specific use and purpose. However, it seems that justice is only useful when something is not needed or when it is not being actively used. For example, justice is useful in keeping a deposit safely stored, but when it comes to using the money, it is more practical to seek advice from someone knowledgeable in that field, such as a horse expert or a shipwright. Similarly, justice is useful in keeping items like a pruning hook, shield, or lyre safe, but when it comes to using them, it is more effective to rely on the expertise of a vinedresser, soldier, or musician. So, justice seems to be of limited use. But let's consider another aspect. In the context of physical combat, the person who can deliver the strongest blow is also the most capable of defending against one. That is true. The same principle applies to preventing or escaping from diseases. The person who is most skilled in these areas is also the most capable of creating a disease. And in terms of guarding a camp, the best guard is skilled at sneaking up on the enemy. Then he who is a good keeper of anything is also a good thief. That, I suppose, is to be inferred. then if the just man is good at keeping money, he is good at stealing it. That is implied in the argument. Then after all, the just man has turned out to be a thief. And this is a lesson which I suspect you must have learned out of Homer, for he, speaking of Autolycus, the maternal grandfather of Odysseus, who was a favorite of his, affirms that he was excellent above all men in theft and perjury. And so, you and Homer and Simonides agreed that justice is an art of theft, to be practiced however for the good of friends and for the harm of enemies. That was what you were saying? No, certainly not that, though I do not now know what I did say, but I still stand by the latter words. Well, there is another question. Do we mean true friends and enemies, or just those who appear to be so? Surely, a man is expected to love those he believes to be good and hate those he believes to be evil. Yes, but don't people often make mistakes about what is good and evil? Many who are not good appear to be so, and vice versa. That is true. So, to them, the good will be enemies and the evil will be their friends? True. And in that case, they would be right in doing good to evil and evil to the good? Clearly. But the good are just and would not commit injustice? True. So, according to your argument, it is just to harm those who do no wrong? No, Socrates, that doctrine is immoral. Then I suppose we should do good to the just and harm to the unjust? I prefer that. But consider the consequence. Many people who are ignorant of human nature have bad friends, and in that case, they ought to harm them, and they have good enemies whom they ought to benefit from. But if so, we would be saying the opposite of what we initially affirmed to be the meaning of Simonides. Very true, he said. I think we should correct an error we seem to have made in the use of the words friend and enemy. What was the error, Polemarch? I asked. We assumed that someone is a friend if they appear to be or are thought to be good. And how should we correct the error? We should rather say that someone is a friend if they are, as well as appear, good, and someone who only appears to be and is not good is not a friend. The same can be said of an enemy. So, you would argue that the good are our friends and the bad are our enemies? Yes. And instead of simply saying, as we did at first, that it is just to do good to our friends and harm to our enemies, we should further say, it is just to do good to our friends when they are good and harm to our enemies when they are evil? Yes, that appears to be the truth. But should they just harm anyone at all? Undoubtedly, he should harm those who are both wicked and his enemies. When horses are harmed, do they improve or deteriorate? The latter. Deteriorate, meaning they lose their good qualities as horses, not as dogs. Yes, like horses. And dogs deteriorate in the good qualities of dogs, not horses? Of course. And won't men who are harmed deteriorate in their proper virtue as humans? Certainly. And that human virtue is justice? Yes, of course. So, men who are harmed are necessarily made unjust. That is the result. But can a musician, through his art, make men tone deaf? Certainly not. Or can a horseman, through his art, make them bad horsemen? Impossible. And can the just, through justice, make men unjust, or in general, can the good, through virtue, make them bad? Assuredly not. Any more than heat can produce cold? It cannot. Or does drought produce moisture? Clearly not. Nor can good harm anyone? Impossible. And the just is the good? Certainly. So, to harm a friend or anyone else is not the act of a just man, but of the opposite, who is the unjust. I think what you say is quite true, Socrates. Then if a man says that justice consists in repaying debts, and that good is the debt which a just man owes to his friends, and evil is the debt he owes to his enemies, to say this is not wise, for it is not true, if, as has been clearly shown, harming another can never be just. I agree with you, said Polemarch. Then you and I are prepared to oppose anyone who attributes such a saying to Simonides, or Bias, or Pittacus, or any other wise man or seer? I am quite ready to fight alongside you, he said. Shall I tell you whose saying I believe it to be? Whose? I believe it was Periander or Perdiccas or Xerxes or Ismenias the Theban, or some other rich and powerful man, who had a high opinion of his own power, who was the first to say that justice is doing good to your friends and harm to your enemies. Most likely, he said. Yes, I said. But if this definition of justice also fails, what other can be offered? Several times during the discussion, Thrasymachus had tried to take control of the argument, but was silenced by the rest of the company, who wanted to hear the end. But when Polemarch and I finished speaking and there was a pause, he could no longer stay silent. He gathered himself up and came at us like a wild beast, seeking to devour us. We were terrified at the sight of him. He roared out to the whole company, "What foolishness, Socrates, has taken hold of all of you? And why, foolish people, do you submit to one another? I say that if you truly want to know what justice is, you should not only ask but answer, and you should not seek honor for yourself by refuting an opponent but have your own answer, for there are many who can ask but cannot answer. And now I will not tolerate you saying that justice is duty or advantage or profit or gain or interest, for this kind of nonsense will not satisfy me. I need clarity and accuracy." I was terrified by his words and couldn't look at him without shaking. Indeed, I believe that if I hadn't kept my eyes on him, I would have been speechless. But when I saw his anger rising, I looked at him first, and was therefore able to respond to him. "Thrasymachus," I said, with a quiver, "don't be harsh on us. Polemarch and I may have made a small mistake in the argument, but I can assure you that it was not intentional. If we were searching for a piece of gold, you wouldn't think that we were yielding to one another and losing our chance of finding it. And why, when we are searching for justice, something more valuable than many pieces of gold, do you say that we are weakly yielding to one another and not doing our best to find the truth? No, my good friend, we are willing and eager to do so, but the truth is that we cannot. And if that's the case, you, who know everything, should pity us and not be angry with us." "How typical of Socrates," he replied, with a bitter laugh, "that's your ironic style. Didn't I foresee, haven't I already told you, that whatever he was asked he would refuse to answer, and try irony or any other trick, to avoid answering?" "You are a philosopher, Thrasymachus," I replied, "and you know well that if you ask a person what numbers make up 12, making sure to prohibit him from answering twice 6, or 3 times 4, or 6 times 2, or 4 times 3, because this sort of nonsense won't do for me, then obviously, if that's how you ask the question, no one can answer you. But what if he were to respond, 'Thrasymachus, what do you mean? If one of these numbers that you forbid is the correct answer to the question, should I falsely say some other number that is not the right one? Is that what you mean?' How would you answer him?" "Just as if the two cases were at all alike," he said. "Why shouldn't they be?" I replied, "And even if they are not, but only appear to be so to the person who is asked, shouldn't he say what he thinks, whether you and I forbid him or not? I assume then that you are going to give one of the forbidden answers?" "I suppose that I may, despite the danger, if upon reflection I approve of any of them." "But what if I give you an answer about justice that is different and better," he said, "than any of these? What do you deserve to have done to you?" "Done to me? As befits the ignorant, I must learn from the wise, that is what I deserve to have done to me." "What, and no payment? A pleasant notion." "I will pay when I have the money," I replied. "But you have, Socrates," said Glaucon, "and you, Thrasymachus, need not worry about money, for we will all contribute for Socrates." "Yes," he replied, "and then Socrates will do as he always does, refuse to answer himself, but criticize the answer of someone else." "Why, my good friend," I said, "how can anyone answer who knows, and says that he knows, absolutely nothing, and who, even if he has some faint notions of his own, is told by a person of authority not to express them? The natural thing is that the speaker should be someone like yourself who claims to know and can tell what he knows. Will you then kindly answer, for the enlightenment of the company and of myself?" Glaucon and the rest of the company joined in my request, and Thrasymachus, as anyone could see, was eager to speak, for he thought that he had an excellent answer and would distinguish himself. But at first, he pretended to insist on my answering. Eventually, he agreed to begin. "Behold," he said, "the wisdom of Socrates. He refuses to teach himself, and goes about learning from others, to whom he never even says thank you." "That I learn from others," I replied, "is quite true, but that I am ungrateful I completely deny. Money, I have none, and therefore I pay in praise, which is all I have, and how willing I am to praise anyone who appears to me to speak well you will very soon find out when you answer, for I expect that you will answer well." "Listen, then," he said, "I declare that justice is nothing else than the interest of the stronger. And now why don't you praise me? But of course, you won't." "Let me first understand you," I replied. "Justice, as you say, is the interest of the stronger. What, Thrasymachus, is the meaning of this? You cannot mean to say that because Polydamas, the athlete, is stronger than we are, and finds the eating of beef beneficial to his physical strength, that eating beef is therefore equally good for our weaker selves, and right and just for us? That's terrible of you, Socrates. You interpret the words in the sense that is most damaging to the argument." "Not at all, my good sir," I said. "I am trying to understand them, and I wish that you would be a little clearer." "Well," he said, "have you never heard that forms of government differ? There are tyrannies, and there are democracies, and there are aristocracies?" "Yes, I know." "And the government is the ruling power in each state?" "Certainly." "And the different forms of government create laws democratic, aristocratic, tyrannical, with the intention of serving their own interests, and these laws, which are made by them for their own interests, are the justice that they deliver to their subjects, and they punish anyone who breaks them as a violator of the law, and unjust. And that is what I mean when I say that in all states there is the same principle of fairness, which is the interest of the government, and as the government must be supposed to have power, the only reasonable conclusion is that everywhere there is one principle of fairness, which is the interest of the more powerful." "Now I understand you," I said. "And whether you are right or not, I will try to discover. But let me remark that in defining fairness, you have yourself used the word interest, which you forbade me to use. It is true, however, that in your definition, the words of the more powerful are added. A small addition, you must allow," he said. "Great or small, never mind about that," I replied. "We must first inquire whether what you are saying is the truth. Now we both agree that fairness is interest of some sort, but you go on to say, of the more powerful. About this addition, I am not so sure and must therefore consider further." "Proceed," he said. "I will. And first, tell me, do you admit that it is fair for subjects to obey their rulers?" I asked. "I do," he replied. "But are the rulers of states absolutely infallible, or are they sometimes liable to err?" I questioned. "To be sure, they are liable to err," he admitted. "Then in making their laws, they may sometimes make them rightly, and sometimes not." I continued. "True," he said. "When they make them rightly, they make them agreeably to their interest. When they are mistaken, contrary to their interest, you admit that?" I asked. "Yes," he agreed. "And the laws which they make must be obeyed by their subjects, and that is what you call fairness?" I asked. "Doubtless," he replied. "Then fairness, according to your argument, is not only obedience to the interest of the more powerful, but the reverse?" I stated. "What is that you are saying?" he asked. "I am only repeating what you are saying, I believe," I replied. "But let us consider, have we not admitted that the rulers may be mistaken about their own interest in what they command, and also that to obey them is fairness? Has not that been admitted?" I asked. "Yes," he acknowledged. "Then you must also have acknowledged fairness not to be for the interest of the more powerful when the rulers unintentionally command things to be done which are to their own injury." For if, as you say, fairness is the obedience which the subject renders to their commands, in that case, O wisest of men, is there any escape from the conclusion that the weaker are commanded to do, not what is for the interest, but what is for the injury of the more powerful? I questioned. Nothing can be clearer, Socrates, said Polemarch. Yes, said Cleitophon, interposing, if you are allowed to be his witness. But there is no need for any witness, said Polemarch. For Thrasymachus himself acknowledges that rulers may sometimes command what is not for their own interest, and that for subjects, to obey them is fairness. Yes, Polemarch, I said. Thrasymachus said that for subjects, to do what was commanded by their rulers is just. Yes, Cleitophon, but he also said that fairness is the interest of the more powerful. And while admitting both these propositions, he further acknowledged that the more powerful may command the weaker who are his subjects to do what is not for his own interest. Whence follows that fairness is the injury quite as much as the interest of the more powerful, I explained. But, said Cleitophon, he meant by the interest of the more powerful what the more powerful thought to be his interest, this was what the weaker had to do. And this was affirmed by him to be fairness. Those were not his words, rejoined Polemarch. Never mind, I replied. If he now says that they are, let us accept his statement. Tell me, Thrasymachus, did you mean by fairness what the more powerful thought to be his interest, whether so or not? I asked. Certainly not, he said. Do you suppose that I call him who is mistaken the more powerful at the time when he is mistaken? I inquired. Yes, I said, my impression was that you did so when you admitted that the ruler was not infallible, but might be sometimes mistaken. You argue like an informer, Socrates, he retorted. Do you mean, for example, that he who is mistaken about the sick is a physician in that he is mistaken? Or that he who errs in arithmetic or grammar is an arithmetician or grammarian at the time when he is making the mistake, in respect of the mistake? I asked. True, we say that the physician or arithmetician or grammarian has made a mistake, but this is only a way of speaking. For the fact is that neither the grammarian nor any other person of skill ever makes a mistake in so far as he is what his name implies. They none of them err unless their skill fails them, and then they cease to be skilled artists. No artist or sage or ruler errs at the time when he is what his name implies. Though he is commonly said to err, and I adopted the common mode of speaking. But to be perfectly accurate, since you are such a lover of accuracy, we should say that the ruler, in so far as he is a ruler, is unerring. And being unerring always commands that which is for his own interest. And the subject is required to execute his commands. And therefore, as I said at first and now repeat, fairness is the interest of the more powerful, I concluded. Indeed, Thrasymachus, and do I really appear to you to argue like an informer? I asked. Certainly, he replied. And do you suppose that I ask these questions with any design of injuring you in the argument? I inquired. Nay, he replied, suppose is not the word, I know it. But you will be found out, and by sheer force of argument, you will never prevail. I shall not make the attempt, my dear man. But to avoid any misunderstanding occurring between us in the future, let me ask, in what sense do you speak of a ruler or stronger whose interest, as you were saying, he being the superior, it is just that the inferior should execute? Is he a ruler in the popular or in the strict sense of the term? I questioned. In the strictest of all senses, he said. And now, if you can, deceive and play the informant, I ask no mercy from you. But you will never be able to, never. And do you think, I said, that I am such a fool as to try and deceive you, Thrasymachus? I might as well try to shave a lion. Why, he said, you attempted it just a minute ago, and you failed. Enough, I said, of these jokes. It would be better if I asked you a question. Is the doctor, in the strict sense of which you are speaking, a healer of the sick or a money-maker? And remember that I am talking about the true doctor. A healer of the sick, he replied. And the captain, that is to say, the true captain, is he a leader of sailors or just a sailor? a leader of sailors. The fact that he sails in this ship is not important. He should not be called a sailor. The title captain, by which he is distinguished, has nothing to do with sailing, but indicates his skill and authority over the sailors. Very true, he said. Now, I said, every craft has an interest? Certainly. Something that the craft has to consider and provide for? Yes, that is the goal of the craft. And the interest of any craft is its perfection, this and nothing else? What do you mean? I mean what I can illustrate negatively using the example of the body. Suppose you were to ask me whether the body is self-sufficient or has needs, I would reply, certainly, the body has needs, for the body may be ill and require to be cured, and therefore has interests to which the craft of medicine caters, and this is the origin and purpose of medicine, as you will acknowledge. Am I not, right? Quite right, he replied. But is the craft of medicine or any other craft faulty or deficient in any quality in the same way that the eye may be deficient in sight or the ear fail to hear, and therefore requires another craft to provide for the interests of seeing and hearing? Does craft in itself, I say, have any similar vulnerability to fault or defect, and does every craft require another supplementary craft to provide for its interests, and then another and another without end? Or do the crafts only look after their own interests? Or do they not need themselves or another? Having no faults or defects, they have no need to correct them either through their own craft or any other, they only must consider the interest of their subject matter. Because every craft remains pure and faultless while remaining true, that is to say, while perfect and unimpaired. Take the words in your precise sense, and tell me whether I am not right. Yes, clearly. Then medicine does not consider the interest of medicine, but the interest of the body? True, he said. Nor does the craft of horsemanship consider the interests of the craft of horsemanship, but the interests of the horse. Neither do any other crafts care for themselves, for they have no needs, they only care for that which is the subject of their craft. True, he said. But surely, Thrasymachus, the crafts are the superiors and rulers of their own subjects. To this he reluctantly agreed. Then, I said, no science or craft considers or commands the interest of the stronger or superior, but only the interest of the subject and weaker. He made an attempt to contest this proposition as well, but eventually agreed. Then, I continued, no doctor, as a doctor, considers his own good in what he prescribes, but the good of his patient, for the true doctor is also a ruler having the human body as a subject, and is not just a money-maker. That has been admitted? Yes. And the captain likewise, in the strict sense of the term, is a ruler of sailors and not just a sailor? That has been admitted. And such a captain and ruler will provide and prescribe for the interest of the sailor who is under him, and not for his own or the ruler's interest? He reluctantly said yes. Then, I said, Thrasymachus, there is no one in any position of power who, as long as they are in power, considers or commands what is for their own interest, but always what is for the interest of their subject or suitable to their craft. That is what they look to, and that alone they consider in everything they say and do. When we had reached this point in the argument, and everyone saw that the definition of justice had been completely overturned, Thrasymachus, instead of replying to me, said, Tell me, Socrates, do you have a nurse? Why do you ask such a question, I said, when you should be answering instead? Because she leaves you to snivel, and never wipes your nose. She has not even taught you to know the shepherd from the sheep. What makes you say that? I replied. Because you believe that the shepherd or cowherd fattens or tends the sheep or oxen for their own good and not for the good of himself or his master, and you also imagine that the rulers of states, if they are true rulers, never think of their subjects as sheep, and that they are not constantly considering their own advantage. Oh, no, and you are so mistaken in your ideas about the just and unjust that you don't even know that justice and the just are actually for the good of another, that is to say, the interest of the ruler and stronger, and the loss of the subject and servant, and injustice is the opposite, for the unjust is the ruler over the truly simple and just, he is the stronger, and his subjects do what is for his interest, and serve his happiness, which is very far from being their own. Consider further, Socrates, that it is always disadvantageous for the fair and just in comparison to the unjust. Firstly, in private contracts, whenever the fair and just individual partners with the unjust, it is evident that when the partnership is dissolved, the unjust person always gains more while the fair person gains less. Secondly, in their dealings with the state, when there is an income tax, the fair person will pay more while the unjust person pays less, even if they have the same amount of income. And when there is something to be received, the fair person gains nothing while the unjust person gains much. Also, observe what happens when they take on a public office. The fair person neglects their own affairs and may even suffer losses, receiving nothing from the public because of their fairness. Moreover, they are hated by their friends and acquaintances for refusing to engage in unlawful activities. But all of this is reversed for the unjust person. I am speaking, as before, of injustice on a large scale where the advantage of the unjust is most apparent. My meaning will be most clearly seen if we turn to the highest form of injustice, where the criminal is the happiest and those who refuse to do injustice are the most miserable. I am referring to tyranny, which, through deceit and force, takes away the property of others, not gradually, but completely. This includes both sacred and secular things, private and public. For these acts of wrongdoing, if the unjust person were to be caught committing any one of them individually, they would be punished and face great disgrace. Those who commit such wrongs in specific cases are called temple robbers, kidnappers, burglars, swindlers, and thieves. But when a person not only takes away the money of the citizens, but also enslaves them, instead of being called by these derogatory names, they are deemed happy and blessed, not only by the citizens, but by all who hear of their achievement of ultimate injustice. Mankind censures injustice, not because they shy away from committing it, but because they fear becoming its victims. Thus, as I have shown, Socrates, injustice, when on a sufficient scale, has more strength, freedom, and power than fairness. And as I said at the beginning, fairness is the interest of the stronger, whereas injustice is a person's own profit and interest. Thrasymachus, after speaking in this manner, wanted to leave, but the company insisted that he stay and defend his position. I added my humble request that he would not leave us. Thrasymachus, I said to him, excellent man, your remarks are thought-provoking. Are you going to run away before we have determined whether they are true or not? Is the attempt to determine the way of a person's life of such little importance to you? To determine how each one of us can live to our greatest advantage? Do we differ in our views on the importance of this inquiry? You appear to have no care or thought about us, Thrasymachus, I replied. Whether we live better or worse due to not knowing what you claim to know seems to be of no concern to you. Please, friend, do not keep your knowledge to yourself. We are a large group, and any benefit you bestow upon us will be greatly rewarded. As for myself, I openly declare that I am not convinced and I do not believe that injustice is more advantageous than fairness, even if it is unrestrained and allowed to have free rein. Even if there may be an unjust person who is capable of committing injustice through deceit or force, it does not convince me of the superior advantage of injustice. There may be others who share the same predicament as myself. Perhaps we are mistaken. If so, you, in your wisdom, should convince us that we are wrong in preferring fairness to injustice. And how am I supposed to convince you, he said, if you are not already convinced by what I have just said? What more can I do for you? Would you like me to physically prove it to your soul? Heaven forbids. I spoke. I only ask that you be consistent. Or if you change your position, do so openly and without deception. I must point out, Thrasymachus, I continued, that although you started by defining the true physician in an exact sense, you did not maintain the same precision when speaking about the shepherd. You believed that the shepherd tends to the sheep not for their own good, but merely for the pleasure of eating or feasting, or as a trader selling in the market, rather than as a shepherd. However, the art of shepherding is solely concerned with the well-being of the sheep. The shepherd's duty is to provide the best for them, if all the requirements of the art are fulfilled. I was saying the same thing earlier about rulers. I believed that the art of ruling, whether in a state or in private life, should only consider the good of the people or subjects. Yet, you seem to think that rulers in states, the true rulers, enjoy being in authority. You don't just think about it, you are sure of it. Then why is it that in the case of lesser offices, people never take them willingly without payment, unless they believe that they govern for the benefit of others and not themselves? Let me ask you a question. Are the various arts not different because each has a separate function? And my dear illustrious friend, please share your thoughts so that we may make some progress. Yes, that is the difference, he replied. And each skill gives us a particular benefit and not merely a general one. Medicine, for example, gives us health, navigation, safety at sea, and so on? Yes, he said. And the skill of payment has the special function of giving pay, but we do not confuse this with other skills, any more than the skill of the pilot is to be confused with the skill of medicine, because the health of the pilot may be improved by a sea voyage. You would not be inclined to say, would you, that navigation is the skill of medicine, at least if we are to adopt your exact use of language? Certainly not. Or because a man is in good health when he receives pay, you would not say that the skill of payment is medicine? I should not. Nor would you say that medicine is the skill of receiving pay because a man takes fees when he is engaged in healing? Certainly not. And we have admitted, I said, that the benefit of each skill is specially confined to the skill? Yes. Then, if there be any benefit which all artists have in common, that is to be attributed to something of which they all have the common use? True, he replied. And when the artist is benefited by receiving pay, the advantage is gained by an additional use of the skill of pay, which is not the skill professed by him. He gave a reluctant assent to this. Then the pay is not derived by the several artists from their respective skills. But the truth is that while the skill of medicine gives health, and the skill of the builder builds a house, another skill attends them, which is the skill of pay. The various skills may be doing their own business and benefiting that over which they preside, but would the artist receive any benefit from his skill unless he were paid as well? I suppose not. But does he therefore confer no benefit when he works for nothing? Certainly, he confers a benefit. Then now, Thrasymachus, there is no longer any doubt that neither skills nor governments provide for their own interests, but, as we were before saying, they rule and provide for the interests of their subjects who are the weaker and not the stronger, to their good they attend and not to the good of the superior. And this is the reason, my dear Thrasymachus, why, as I was just now saying, no one is willing to govern, because no one likes to take in hand the reformation of evils which are not his concern without remuneration. For, in the execution of his work, and in giving his orders to another, the true artist does not regard his own interest, but always that of his subjects, and therefore, in order that rulers may be willing to rule, they must be paid in one of three modes of payment, money, or honor, or a penalty for refusing. What do you mean, Socrates? Said Glaucon. The first two modes of payment are intelligible enough, but what the penalty is I do not understand, or how a penalty can be a payment. You mean that you do not understand the nature of this payment, which to the best men is the great inducement to rule? Of course, you know that ambition and avarice are held to be, as indeed they are, a disgrace? Very true. And for this reason, I said, money and honor have no attraction for them. Good men do not wish to be openly demanding payment for governing and so to get the name of hirelings, nor by secretly helping themselves out of the public revenues to get the name of thieves. And not being ambitious, they do not care about honor. Wherefore necessity must be laid upon them, and they must be induced to serve from the fear of punishment. And this, as I imagine, is the reason why the forwardness to take office, instead of waiting to be compelled, has been deemed dishonorable. Now the worst part of the punishment is that he who refuses to rule is liable to be ruled by one who is worse than himself. And the fear of this, as I conceive, induces the good to take office, not because they would, but because they cannot help, not under the idea that they are going to have any benefit or enjoyment themselves, but as a necessity, and because they are not able to commit the task of ruling to anyone who is better than themselves, or indeed as good. For there is reason to think that if a city were composed entirely of good men, then to avoid office would be as much an object of contention as to obtain office is at present, then we should have plain proof that the true ruler is not meant by nature to regard his own interest, but that of his subjects, and everyone who knew this would choose rather to receive a benefit from another than to have the trouble of conferring one. So far am I from agreeing with Thrasymachus that justice is the interest of the stronger. This latter question need not be further discussed at present, but when Thrasymachus says that the life of the unjust is more advantageous than that of the just, his new statement appears to me to be of a far more serious character. Which of us has spoken truly? And which sort of life, Glaucon, do you prefer? I for my part deem the life of the just to be the more advantageous, he answered. Did you hear all the advantages of the unjust which Thrasymachus was rehearsing? Yes, I heard him, he replied, but he has not convinced me. Then shall we try to find some way of convincing him, if we can, that he is saying what is not true? Most certainly, he replied. If, I said, he makes a set speech and we make another recounting all the advantages of being just, and he answers and we rejoin, there must be a numbering and measuring of the goods which are claimed on either side, and in the end we shall want judges to decide. But if we proceed in our inquiry as we lately did, by making admissions to one another, we shall unite the offices of judge and advocate in our own persons. Very good, he said. And which method do I understand you to prefer? I spoke. That which you propose. Well, then, Thrasymachus, I said, suppose you begin at the beginning and answer me. You say that perfect injustice is more profitable than perfect justice? Yes, that is what I say, and I have given you my reasons. And what is your view about them? Would you call one of them virtue and the other vice? Certainly. I suppose that you would call justice virtue and injustice vice? What a charming notion. So likely too, seeing that I affirm injustice to be profitable and justice not. What else then would you say? The opposite, he replied. And would you call justice vice? No, I would rather say sublime simplicity. Then would you call injustice malignity? No, I would rather say discretion. And do the unjust appear to you to be wise and good? Yes, he said, at any rate those of them who are able to be perfectly unjust, and who have the power of subduing states and nations, but perhaps you imagine me to be talking of thieves. Even this profession, if undetected, has advantages, though they are not to be compared with those of which I was just now speaking. I do not think that I misapprehend your meaning, Thrasymachus, I replied, but still I cannot hear without amazement that you class injustice with wisdom and virtue, and justice with the opposite. Certainly, I do so class them. Now, I said, you are on more substantial and almost unanswerable ground, for if the injustice which you were maintaining to be profitable had been admitted by you as by others to be vice and deformity, an answer might have been given to you on received principles. But now I perceive that you will call injustice honorable and strong, and to the unjust you will attribute all the qualities which were attributed by us before to the just, seeing that you do not hesitate to rank injustice with wisdom and virtue. You have guessed most infallibly, he replied. Then I certainly ought not to shrink from going through with the argument so long as I have reason to think that you, Thrasymachus, are speaking your real mind, for I do believe that you are now in earnest and are not amusing yourself at our expense. I may be in earnest or not, but what is that to you? To refute the argument is your business. Very true, I said, that is what I have to do. But will you be so good as to answer yet one more question? Does the just man try to gain any advantage over the just? Far otherwise, if he did, he would not be the simple amusing creature which he is. And would he try to go beyond just action? He would not. And how would he regard the attempt to gain an advantage over the unjust? Would that be considered by him as just or unjust? He would think it just and would try to gain the advantage, but he would not be able. Whether he would or would not be able, I said, is not to the point. My question is only whether the just man, while refusing to have more than another just man, would wish and claim to have more than the unjust? Yes, he would. And what of the unjust? Does he claim to have more than the just man and to do more than is just? Of course, he said, for he claims to have more than all men. And the unjust man will strive and struggle to obtain more than the unjust man or action, in order that he may have more than all? True. We may put the matter thus, I said. The just does not desire more than his like, but more than his unlike, whereas the unjust desires more than both his like and his unlike? Nothing, he said, can be better than that statement. And the unjust is good and wise, and the just is neither? Good again, he said. And is not the unjust like the wise and good and the just unlike them? Of course, he said, he who is of a certain nature is like those who are of a certain nature, he who is not, not. Each of them, I said, is such as his like is? Certainly, he replied. Very good, Thrasymachus, I said, and now to take the case of the arts, you would admit that one man is a musician and another not a musician? Yes. And which is wise, and which is foolish? Clearly the musician is wise, and he who is not a musician is foolish. And he is good in as far as he is wise, and bad in as far as he is foolish? Yes. And you would say the same sort of thing of the physician? Yes. And do you think, my excellent friend, that a musician when he adjusts the lyre would desire or claim to exceed or go beyond a musician in the tightening and loosening the strings? I do not think that he would. But he would claim to exceed the non-musician? Of course. And what would you say of the physician? In prescribing meats and drinks, would he wish to go beyond another physician or beyond the practice of medicine? He would not. But he would wish to go beyond the non-physician? Yes. And about knowledge and ignorance in general, see whether you think that any man who has knowledge ever would wish to have the choice of saying or doing more than another man who has knowledge. Would he not rather say or do the same as he like in the same case? That, I suppose, can hardly be denied. And what of the ignorant? Would he not desire to have more than either the knowing or the ignorant? I dare say. And the knowing is wise? Yes. And the wise is good? True. Then the wise and good person will not desire to gain more than someone who is like them, but more than someone who is unlike and opposite to them? I suppose so. Whereas the bad and ignorant person will desire to gain more than both? Yes. But did we not say, Thrasymachus, that the unjust person goes beyond both someone who is like them and someone who is unlike them? Were not these your words? They were. And you also said that the just person will not go beyond someone who is like them, but someone who is unlike them? Yes. Then the just person is like the wise and good person, and the unjust person is like the evil and ignorant person? That is the inference. And each of them is like their like? That was admitted. Then the just person has turned out to be wise and good, and the unjust person evil and ignorant. Thrasymachus made all these admissions, not fluently, as I repeat them, but with extreme reluctance. It was a hot summer's day, and the perspiration poured from him in torrents, and then I saw what I had never seen before, Thrasymachus blushing. As we now agreed that justice was virtue and wisdom, and injustice, vice, and ignorance, I proceeded to another point. Well, I said, Thrasymachus, that matter is now settled, but were we not also saying that injustice had strength? Do you remember? Yes, I remember, he said, but do not suppose that I approve of what you are saying or have no answer. If however I were to answer, you would be quite certain to accuse me of haranguing, therefore either permit me to have my say out, or if you would rather ask, do so, and I will answer, very good, as they say to storytelling old women, and will nod yes and no certainly not, I said, if contrary to your real opinion. Yes, he said, I will please you, since you will not let me speak. What else would you have? Nothing in the world, I said, and if you are so disposed, I will ask, and you shall answer. Proceed. Then I will repeat the question which I asked before, in order that our examination of the relative nature of justice and injustice may be carried on regularly. A statement was made that injustice is stronger and more powerful than justice, but now justice, having been identified with wisdom and virtue, is easily shown to be stronger than injustice. If injustice is ignorance, this can no longer be questioned by anyone. But I want to view the matter, Thrasymachus, in a different way. You would not deny that a state may be unjust and may be unjustly attempting to enslave other states, or may have already enslaved them, and may be holding many of them in subjection? True, he replied, and I will add that the best and most perfectly unjust state will be most likely to do so. I know, I said, that such was your position, but what I would further consider is whether this power, which is possessed by the superior state, can exist or be exercised without justice or only with justice. If you are right in your view, and justice is wisdom, then only with justice, but if I am right, then without justice. I am delighted, Thrasymachus, to see you not only nodding assent and dissent, but making answers which are quite excellent. That is out of civility to you, he replied. You are very kind, I said, and would you have the goodness also to inform me whether you think that a state, or an army, or a band of robbers and thieves, or any other gang of evildoers could act at all if they injured one another? No indeed, he said, they could not. But if they abstained from injuring one another, then they might act together better? Yes. And this is because injustice creates divisions and hatreds and fighting, and justice imparts harmony and friendship. Is not that true, Thrasymachus? I agree, he said, because I do not wish to quarrel with you. How good of you, I said, but I should like to know also whether injustice, having this tendency to arouse hatred, wherever existing, among slaves or among freemen, will not make them hate one another and set them at variance and render them incapable of common action? Certainly. And even if injustice be found in two only, will they not quarrel and fight, and become enemies to one another and to the just? They will. And suppose injustice abiding in a single person, would your wisdom say that she loses or that she retains her natural power? Let us assume that she retains her power. Yet is not the power which injustice exercises of such a nature that wherever she takes up her abode, whether in a city, in an army, in a family, or in any other body, that body is, to begin with, rendered incapable of united action by reason of sedition and distraction, and does it not become its own enemy and at variance with all that opposes it, and with the just? Is not this the case? Yes, certainly. And is injustice not equally fatal when existing in a single person, in the first place rendering him incapable of action because he is not at unity with himself, and in the second place making him an enemy to himself and the just? Is not that true, Thrasymachus? Yes. And oh my friend, I said, surely the gods are just? Granted that they are. But if so, the unjust will be the enemy of the gods, and the just will be their friend? Feast away in triumph and take your fill of the argument. I will not oppose you, lest I should displease the company. Well then, proceed with your answers, and let me have the remainder of my repast. For we have already shown that the just are clearly wiser and better and abler than the unjust, and that the unjust are incapable of common action, any more, that to speak as we did of men who are evil acting at any time vigorously together, is not strictly true, for if they had been perfectly evil, they would have laid hands upon one another, but it is evident that there must have been some remnant of justice in them, which enabled them to combine. If there had not been, they would have injured one another as well as their victims. They were but half villains in their enterprises, for had they been whole villains, and utterly unjust, they would have been utterly incapable of action. That, in my belief, is the truth of the matter, and not what you said at first. But whether the righteous have a better and happier life than the unjust is a further question which we also proposed to consider. I think that they have, and for the reasons which I have given, but still, I should like to examine further, for no light matter is at stake, nothing less than the rule of human life. Proceed. I will proceed by asking a question. Would you not say that a horse has some purpose? I should. And the purpose or use of a horse or of anything would be that which could not be accomplished, or not so well accomplished, by any other thing? I do not understand, he said. Let me explain. Can you see, except with the eye? Certainly not. Or hear, except with the ear? No. These then may be truly said to be the purposes of these organs? They may. But you can cut off a vine branch with a dagger or with a chisel, and in many other ways? Of course. And yet not so well as with a pruning hook made for the purpose? True. May we not say that this is the purpose of a pruning hook? We may. Then now I think you will have no difficulty in understanding my meaning when I ask the question whether the purpose of anything would be that which could not be accomplished, or not so well accomplished, by any other thing? I understand your meaning, he said, and agree. And that to which a purpose is appointed has also an excellence? Need I ask again whether the eye has a purpose? It has. And has not the eye an excellence? Yes. And does the ear have a purpose and an excellence also? True. And the same is true of all other things. Do they each have a purpose and a special excellence? That is so. Well, and can the eyes fulfill their purpose if they are lacking in their own proper excellence and have a defect instead? How can they, he said, if they are blind and cannot see? You mean to say, if they have lost their proper excellence, which is sight, but I have not arrived at that point yet. I would rather ask the question more generally, and only inquire whether the things which fulfill their purposes fulfill them by their own proper excellence, and fail to fulfill them by their own defect? Certainly, he replied. I might say the same of the ears. When deprived of their own proper excellence, they cannot fulfill their purpose. True. And the same observation will apply to all other things? I agree. Well, and does not the soul have a purpose which nothing else can fulfill? For example, to supervise and command and deliberate and the like. Are these functions not proper to the soul, and can they rightly be assigned to any other? To no other. And is life not to be considered among the purposes of the soul? Assuredly, he said. And does not the soul have an excellence also? Yes. And can she or can she not fulfill her own purposes when deprived of that excellence? She cannot. Then an evil soul must necessarily be an evil ruler and supervisor, and a good soul a good ruler? Yes, necessarily. And we have admitted that justice is the excellence of the soul, and injustice the defect of the soul? That has been admitted. Then the just soul and the just man will live well, and the unjust man will live poorly? That is what your argument proves. And he who lives well is blessed and happy, and he who poorly lives the opposite of happy? Certainly. Then the just is happy, and the unjust miserable? So be it. But happiness and not misery is profitable. Of course. Then, my blessed Thrasymachus, injustice can never be more profitable than justice. Let this, Socrates, he said, be your entertainment at Bendidia. For which I am indebted to you, I said, now that you have grown gentle towards me, and have left off scolding. Nevertheless, I was not well entertained, but that was my own fault and not yours. As an epicure snatches a taste of every dish which is successively brought to table, he not having allowed himself time to enjoy the one before, so have I gone from one subject to another without having discovered what I sought at first, the nature of justice. I left that inquiry and turned away to consider whether justice is virtue and wisdom or evil and folly, and when there arose a further question about the comparative advantages of justice and injustice, I could not refrain from passing on to that. And the result of the whole discussion was that I know nothing at all. For I know not what justice is, and therefore I am not likely to know whether it is or is not a virtue, nor can I say whether the just man is happy or unhappy. Summary of Chapter 1. In Chapter 1, the dialogue begins with Socrates visiting the house of the wealthy Athenian, Cephalus. Socrates, along with his companions Glaucon and Adeimantus, engage in a conversation with Cephalus about the joys and challenges of old age. Cephalus emphasizes the value of contentment and a peaceful life in one's later years, suggesting that old age can bring a sense of freedom from desire and temptation. The focus then shifts to the nature of justice, as Socrates asks Cephalus whether old age truly brings contentment or if it merely allows people to escape the consequences of their actions. This leads to a discussion about wealth, morality, and the pursuit of one's desires. Socrates challenges Cephalus's perspective on justice by suggesting that it is more than simply adhering to agreements and repaying debts. He implies that true justice involves a deeper understanding of morality and the well-being of the soul. As the dialogue progresses, Cephalus departs, and his son Polemarch takes his place. Socrates and Polemarch engage in a discussion about the concept of justice. Polemarch argues that justice involves helping friends and harming enemies. However, Socrates questions this definition and seeks a more comprehensive understanding of justice. This sets the stage for the deeper exploration of justice and morality that follows. It introduces key themes and characters while raising fundamental questions about the nature of justice and the pursuit of a good life.